There is a moment, and if you have lived long enough, you know exactly the one, where everything you thought you had built turns out to be resting on a foundation you never actually inspected. Raymond Cole had that moment at 46 years old, on a Tuesday morning in a boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, sitting across from a man he had never formally met, but whose name he had been hearing in whispers for the past 3 weeks. The man did not raise his voice. He did not threaten Raymond. He slid a single document across the table, folded his hands, and waited. And in that silence, in the 4 seconds it took Raymond to read the first paragraph of that document, 16 years of a life he had chosen to walk away from came flooding back through that room like cold water. The document was a notice of majority shareholder acquisition. The company at the top of the letterhead was Raymond's employer, Whitmore Capital Group, where Raymond had spent the last 11 years of his career climbing from junior analyst to senior vice president. The name at the bottom of the document, listed as the new controlling owner, was Arthur Hargrove, and Arthur Hargrove, sitting across that table with the patience of a man who had been waiting not weeks or months, but years for this specific morning, was the father of Diana Cole, the woman Raymond had divorced, the woman his family had convinced him to leave, the woman he had walked away from without ever once asking who her people were. Raymond Cole sat very still. He did not speak for a long time, and in that silence, in that clean, expensive boardroom 40 floors above a city that did not care about him, something he had never allowed himself to feel, finally arrived. It was not fear, it was not anger, it was the particular weight of a man who realizes, too late, always too late, that he never knew the whole story, that he had been living inside a chapter while someone else was writing the entire book. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever watched a man make a decision that looked completely reasonable from the outside, a decision his family cheered and his friends congratulated him on, and known, somewhere deep in your gut, that he was walking into something he didn't fully understand? That is the story of Raymond Cole. And today, we are going to walk through every piece of it. How a man can spend 16 years married to a woman and never know who her father is. How a family can orchestrate a second marriage and call it love. How a quiet, patient billionaire can buy a company without telling a single soul, and then simply wait. And the question that is going to sit with you long after this video ends, was any of this ever really about the company at all? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened in that boardroom on that Tuesday morning, we have to go back, all the way back to Charlotte, North Carolina, to the boy Raymond Cole used to be, because the man he became, and the choices that man made, were set in motion long before he ever walked into Whitmore Capital Group, long before he ever met Diana, and long before Arthur Hargrove made a single phone call that would quietly, permanently, restructure everything Raymond thought he had secured. Raymond Cole grew up in a working-class black household in Charlotte, North Carolina, the third of 4 children. His father worked the line at a textile plant for 22 years. His mother cleaned offices on weekday evenings and made Sunday dinner from scratch every week without fail. They were not poor in the way that announces itself loudly. They were poor in the way that teaches you to count everything, to want without saying so, to define success by the distance between where you started and where you end up. Raymond understood that lesson before he had the language for it. He was the one in the family who was always going to go somewhere. His teachers said it, his pastor said it, his mother said it every time she packed his lunch with the last of the bread. He earned a business degree from a state university on a partial scholarship and 2 jobs. He graduated without celebration, no family trip, no professional photos, because there was no budget for it, and because Raymond was already looking forward, not back. He moved to Atlanta at 24 with $2,000, a good suit he had saved 4 months to buy, and an absolute refusal to return home without something to show for it. He spent his first 18 months in Atlanta doing administrative work at a mid-size financial consulting firm, learning the language of corporate finance the way an immigrant learns a new country, by watching, by listening, and by making himself impossible to overlook. By 28, he had moved to Whitmore Capital Group. By 35, he was a vice president. By 45, he was being quietly discussed as the next executive vice president. Raymond Cole had done everything right. He had run every lap, and he believed, the way men who have worked that hard tend to believe, that the race was essentially over. Diana Cole, the woman he never fully saw. Raymond met Diana Hargrove at a mutual friend's cookout in Atlanta in the summer, when he was 29 years old. She was standing near the edge of the yard, not performing, not working the room, just present in a way that made the room feel more settled by her being in it. She had a stillness to her that Raymond found immediately disarming. She was well dressed without being loud about it. She was educated. She had a degree in finance from a strong school and was working at a non-profit policy institute at the time. She was the kind of woman who asked questions and actually listened to the answers. Raymond was struck immediately, and he did what men who are struck tend to do. He moved toward her, introduced himself, and started talking about his career. Diana listened. She smiled in the right places. She asked him one question, a single, very precise question about a financial model he had mentioned, and the accuracy of that question told him she understood the subject better than he had assumed. He was more interested after that. They exchanged numbers. They had dinner the following week, and within 2 months, Raymond Cole was in love, in the way a man in his late 20s, who has been too busy to pay attention to his heart, finally falls, completely and somewhat recklessly. He did not ask Diana much about her family. She never brought them up. He told himself it wasn't his place to push. The truth, though he would not examine it for years, was simpler. He was more interested in being known than in knowing. He talked. She listened. And somewhere in that imbalance, he missed the most important thing about the woman he was going to marry. Diana Hargrove was the only child of Arthur Hargrove. She had grown up watching her father build something enormous from nothing, had watched him choose quiet over loud at every turn, had watched him absorb every slight without reacting publicly, and she had internalized all of it. She had specifically chosen not to use her father's name to advance herself. She wanted a career she had earned, a relationship she had chosen freely, and a life that was hers. She did not lie to Raymond. She answered the questions he asked. He simply never asked the right ones. And Diana, who had been raised by a man who believed that the people who matter will eventually pay attention, waited. She waited for 16 years. Arthur Hargrove, the man in the background. Arthur Hargrove was born in Memphis, Tennessee, in 1957, the son of a postal worker and a school teacher. He was a quiet child who read everything he could get his hands on and who had, by his mid-20s, identified a specific gap in commercial real estate financing in the Mid-South that no one else seemed to be paying attention to. He started Hargrove Holdings with $20,000, a borrowed truck, and a reputation for keeping his word that traveled faster than any advertisement could. By the mid-1990s, Hargrove Holdings had diversified into financial services, logistics, and private equity. By the time his daughter married Raymond Cole, Arthur Hargrove was worth several $100 million. He drove a modest sedan. He lived in a well-maintained but not extravagant home. He was the kind of wealthy that does not need to announce itself because it never needed your approval to begin with. Arthur adored Diana. He had raised her after her mother passed when Diana was 11, and he had done it with the same precision and patience he brought to everything else in his life. He had watched Diana fall in love with Raymond. He had watched the wedding. He had held his granddaughter Nadia the day she was born. He had watched Raymond succeed professionally and had noted, without comment, the ways in which Raymond's success seemed to increase his certainty and decrease his curiosity. Arthur Hargrove was not a man who said things before he was ready to act on them. He watched, he measured, he waited, and for 16 years, he gave Raymond Cole every opportunity to see what he had. The Cole family, the voices Raymond let in. Raymond's extended family, his aunts, his uncles, his older cousins, and their spouses, formed a close and vocal network that had opinions about everything and shared them generously. They had thrown Raymond a celebration when he got his first promotion. They prayed for him collectively at every family gathering. They were proud of him in that very specific way that working-class families are proud of the one who made it. Fiercely, loudly, and with an ownership over his success that sometimes blurred the line between love and something that looked more like investment. They had always had a complicated relationship with Diana. She was too quiet at gatherings. She did not bring her family around. She did not seem sufficiently grateful for what Raymond had built. Nobody said these things in so many words, but the sentiment accumulated, the way small drops of water accumulate in a bucket, until one day Raymond noticed the bucket was full. Aunt Loretta Cole was Raymond's father's youngest sister, a woman of strong opinions, a loud laugh, and an absolute certainty that she understood people better than they understood themselves. It was Aunt Loretta who had been mentioning Cassandra Voss at family gatherings for the better part of a decade. Cassandra had grown up in the same church as the Cole family. She was warm where Diana was reserved. She laughed at the right moments. She engaged with the family in the way Diana never had. Aunt Loretta thought Cassandra was wonderful. She said so, repeatedly, to anyone who would listen, and several people who had stopped listening years ago. Raymond heard it. He did not act on it, but he heard it, and the thing about words spoken in love, or in something that presents itself as love, is that they do not leave the room when the conversation ends. They stay, they settle, and over years, they become part of the furniture. The marriage that frayed. By the time Raymond and Diana had been married for 12 years, there was a specific kind of distance in their house that neither of them named. It was not the dramatic distance of a marriage in crisis. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no discovery of betrayal. It was the quieter, more durable distance of two people who have stopped reaching toward each other and have each, separately, made peace with the space in between. Raymond was working long hours. Diana had returned to graduate school for her MBA while raising Nadia. They shared a roof, a daughter, and a schedule. What they had stopped sharing was the easy conversation, the unguarded moments, the small intimacies that make a house feel like a home rather than a set of adjacent lives. Raymond began to spend more time at family gatherings. He told himself it was because work was consuming and he needed the release, but what he was actually doing, though he would never have framed it this way at the time, was marinating in an environment that confirmed what was already beginning to take shape in his mind. Aunt Loretta mentioned Cassandra. A cousin mentioned that Cassandra had been asking about Raymond. Another gathering came and went, and someone noted, with careful casualness, that Diana hadn't come again. The observations were never cruel. They were stated with the warm concern of people who love you and want you to be happy. Raymond believed them. That is the thing about the people closest to us. When they are wrong with the same confidence and affection they bring when they are right, and from the inside, it is almost impossible to tell the difference. The filing Raymond Cole filed for divorce on a Thursday in October. He had retained an attorney 3 weeks prior and had moved the conversation forward with the same project management efficiency he brought to everything in his professional life. He served Diana the papers at the house. She was in the kitchen. She received them without visible reaction, which Raymond would later tell a friend was the most unsettling part of the entire experience. He had expected something, tears or anger or pleading, and what he got was Diana setting the papers on the counter beside her coffee cup and asking him, in a perfectly measured voice, whether he had eaten dinner. He had not. She said there were leftovers in the refrigerator. He left. He drove to a hotel. He did not sleep well. Diana's first call after he left was to her attorney. Her second call was to her father. Arthur Hargrove listened to his daughter's voice for 11 minutes. He asked 2 questions. He said very little else. When the call ended, he sat in his home office for a long time without turning on the lights. His assistant later reported that he canceled 3 meetings the following morning. He rescheduled them all by afternoon. Arthur Hargrove processed his grief the way he processed everything, quietly, completely, and without letting it interfere with what needed to happen next. 2 phone calls were made before the week was out, one to his attorney, one to his financial advisor. The nature of those calls would not become clear to Raymond Cole for another 14 months, but they were made. And once Arthur Hargrove decided to move, he moved with the kind of patience that makes the result look inevitable in hindsight. The divorce settlement negotiation lasted 4 months. Diana's attorney was precise, thorough, and completely unhurried, which Raymond's attorney found both professionally admirable and practically unnerving. Every document request was answered exactly on schedule. Every proposed term was met with a counter-proposal that was reasonable, well-supported, and slightly better for Diana than the one Raymond had offered. Nothing about the negotiation was aggressive. Nothing was punitive. Diana did not attempt to extract more than what was fair. She did not invoke resources that, Raymond would eventually understand, she absolutely had access to. She asked for what was reasonable. She accepted what was offered. She signed the final documents on a Wednesday afternoon and returned to Nadia's school play that same evening without missing a single scene. Raymond's family celebrated the finalized divorce at Aunt Loretta's house with a cookout. Raymond sat in his car for 20 minutes before going inside. Cassandra Vipqce. Cassandra Vipqce was 38 years old when she married Raymond Cole, 13 months after his divorce was finalized. She was a project manager at a regional healthcare company, well-organized, socially capable, and possessed of a warmth that expressed itself in small gestures. She remembered people's birthdays, sent thank-you notes, brought the right dish to every gathering. She had known the Cole family through their shared church for most of her adult life, and she had known Raymond, at a distance, for years. She had watched his marriage to Diana with the particular attention of someone who believes, privately, that the match was never quite right, not because she disliked Diana, but because she had decided, somewhere along the way, that she understood Raymond better than Diana did. This is a belief that people who are in love with someone else's spouse often develop. It is rarely accurate, and it is almost never examined closely enough. The wedding was held at the church where Pastor Joel Fenton had presided over the Cole family's spiritual life for 20 years. It was a modest ceremony, close family, close friends, a reception in the church hall with catered food and a DJ who played every song Aunt Loretta requested. Raymond stood at the altar and felt what he told himself was hope. Cassandra stood across from him and felt what she told herself was arrival. They said their vows, they cut the cake, they danced, and in the back of the church hall, in a corner, where no one was paying particular attention, an older man, who had once sat in this same denomination's pews in Memphis 30 years ago, received a text message from his attorney that simply said, "Confirmed." Arthur Hargrove had not attended the wedding. He had known it was happening, and he had, on the morning of Raymond Cole's second wedding, quietly finalized the first stage of a plan that would take 14 months to fully execute. The acquisition, what nobody knew. The mechanics of what Arthur Hargrove did over the following 14 months are worth understanding in some detail, because the story is often told as if it were dramatic, as if Arthur showed up at a boardroom one day in a rage and announced himself like a villain in a movie. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter, more methodical, and in the end far more devastating for Raymond than any open confrontation could have been. Hargrove Holdings identified Whitmore Capital Group as a potential acquisition target 18 months before the divorce. The strategic rationale was legitimate. Whitmore had strong client relationships, a solid mid-market positioning, and a leadership structure that was beginning to show its age. Arthur Hargrove was not looking for a company to buy as revenge. He was looking for the right investment. It simply happened to be the company where his daughter's husband worked. The acquisition was structured through 3 separate holding entities, each registered in different states, each connected to Hargrove Holdings through layers of corporate structure that are entirely legal and entirely common in private equity transactions of this type. The transaction was filed with the SEC. The documents were publicly available to anyone who looked for them. Nobody at Whitmore Capital looked for them. This is not unusual. Miles Whitmore had built his company through relationships, not through the kind of corporate governance infrastructure that tracks incoming ownership changes in real time. By the time the transaction was complete, Arthur Hargrove owned 53% of Whitmore Capital Group. He had paid fair market value. He had broken no laws. He had simply done what he had done dozens of times in his career. He bought a company, and then he showed up for board meetings. The promotion that went quiet. Raymond Cole had been anticipating a promotion to Executive Vice President for the better part of a year. Miles Whitmore had said enough in private conversations to make it a reasonable expectation, not a guarantee, but something close to one. Raymond's team had delivered strong results across 3 consecutive quarters. His client relationships were solid. His visibility within the firm was high. He had, by every internal metric he was aware of, done everything required of him. The promotion felt like a formality. The kind of thing that happens not because you ask for it, but because the organization reaches the logical conclusion of what the numbers have been saying for months. Raymond had not yet learned that organizations do not always follow logic, particularly when their ownership structure has recently and quietly changed. The first sign that something had shifted was subtle enough that Raymond almost missed it. A Monday meeting with Miles Whitmore that had been on the calendar for 3 weeks was moved, then moved again, then replaced with a brief email saying they would connect soon. Raymond noted it and attributed it to Whitmore's schedule. A week later, an internal planning document that should have included Raymond's name as a key stakeholder in the upcoming Q3 leadership briefing did not include it. Raymond's assistant noticed this before Raymond did. She mentioned it carefully. Raymond told her to send an email clarifying his involvement. The email was acknowledged, but not acted upon. Raymond filed the experience under the category of administrative oversight and moved on. He was good at moving on. He had always been good at moving on. That particular skill had gotten him very far in life, and it would cost him considerably in the end. Nadia Cole was 16 years old at the point this story reaches its center of gravity. She was a junior in high school, a thoughtful and serious girl who had her mother's stillness and her grandfather's precision, and, from Raymond, a warmth and a humor that he had always expressed most naturally with her. She split her time between her parents' households according to the custody arrangement, and she managed the transition with a maturity that both parents found quietly heartbreaking. She called her grandfather Arthur every Sunday. They talked for anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, depending on what was happening in Nadia's week. Arthur asked about school, about her friends, about what she was reading. He never asked about Raymond. Nadia noticed this, the way teenagers notice the precise shape of what adults choose not to say. One Sunday evening in late spring, Nadia called her grandfather from her bedroom with the door closed. She had been thinking about something for several weeks, turning it over in the way she turned over anything that bothered her, quietly, carefully, from every angle, until she was sure of what she actually thought. She said, "Grandpa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Arthur said, "I always tell you the truth." She said, "Do you own Daddy's company?" There was a pause on the line. Not a long pause. Arthur Hargrove was not a man who was caught off guard, but a specific, deliberate pause, the kind that precedes a very careful answer. He said, "Sweetheart, I own a lot of things." Then he asked about her history project. Nadia answered the question about her history project. When the call ended, she sat with her phone in her hands for a while. Then she opened a text to her mother. The text said, "He's not going to say anything until he has to." Diana read it 4 hours later. She replied with one word, "Correct." Cassandra pulls a thread. Cassandra Vipqce Cole was not a woman who ignored her instincts. She had built a career on project management, which is to say, she had built a career on noticing when something was off schedule, off budget, or off plan before it became a crisis. She noticed things. It was one of the qualities Raymond had initially found attractive and now occasionally found exhausting. At the annual Whitmore Capital Group Gala, a formal dinner and networking event held at a downtown Atlanta hotel, Cassandra was introduced by Miles Whitmore's wife to a guest she had not previously met. The introduction was brief. The man was warm, elegantly dressed, and older, late 60s, silver-haired, with the easy confidence of someone who has never needed to perform authority, because authority follows him into every room he enters. His name was Arthur Hargrove. He said he knew of Cassandra through the Cole family. He said nothing else. He moved on. Cassandra told Raymond about the introduction on the drive home. She described the man, his name, his manner, the way he had said he knew of her through the Cole family, as if that were the most ordinary thing in the world. Raymond said Hargrove was probably just an investor making the rounds. Cassandra did not press the point. She sat with the feeling instead. She was good at sitting with feelings until she understood them. 3 days later, while Raymond was at the office and Nadia was at school, Cassandra sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and typed Arthur Hargrove into a search engine. The results loaded in 11 seconds. She read for 23 minutes without moving. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the kitchen without speaking for a long time. The room was very quiet. Outside, the neighborhood went about its Tuesday morning. Inside, something had shifted that could not be shifted back. She did not tell Raymond what she had found, not that day. She was not yet sure what to do with the information. What she knew was this: the man she had met at the gala, the man who had looked at her with that specific, unmeasured calm, was not a minor investor making rounds. He was the founder of a holding company with a 9-figure valuation. He was the father of Diana Cole, and he had, according to SEC filings that took her approximately 6 minutes to locate, recently acquired a controlling interest in the company where her husband worked. Cassandra Voss Cole was a project manager. She understood timelines. She understood sequencing. And she understood, sitting alone in that kitchen on a Tuesday morning, that what she was looking at was not a coincidence. It was a plan. And she and Raymond were standing directly in the middle of it. Miles Whitmore calls a board meeting. The notification came on a Friday afternoon. A mandatory board meeting, scheduled for the following Tuesday. The official agenda listed quarterly performance review and leadership succession planning. The language was standard, the kind of corporate framing that could cover almost anything. Raymond received the notice and felt a specific, clean excitement. He had been waiting for this. He had been patient. He had done the work. Leadership succession planning. Those 3 words meant exactly what he thought they meant. And what he thought they meant was that Whitmore was finally formalizing the conversation they had been having for a year. He sent his assistant a calendar hold for Tuesday morning. He bought a new tie. He prepared talking points in a leather notebook, organized by topic, the way he had prepared for every important meeting of his career. He told Cassandra at dinner on Saturday that Tuesday was going to be a good day. Cassandra looked at him across the table and said, "I hope so." She did not elaborate. He did not notice the pause before she said it. On Sunday evening, while Raymond reviewed his talking points and Cassandra sat with a book she was not reading, Nadia called her grandfather. Arthur Hargrove answered on the first ring. Nadia asked if he was going to be in Atlanta on Tuesday. He said yes. She said okay. She said she loved him. He said he loved her more. The call lasted 4 minutes. Arthur Hargrove hung up and finished the cup of coffee on his desk. He had a full schedule on Tuesday. He had been preparing for it for 14 months. There was nothing left to prepare. There was only the morning itself, and the patience to arrive at it without letting what he felt override what he had decided to do. Tuesday morning, Raymond Cole arrived at Whitmore Capital Group at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning. He had woken early, showered deliberately, eaten a full breakfast, the kind of morning preparation that is also a kind of ritual, a way of telling yourself that today matters and you are ready for it. He wore the new tie. He had his notebook. He took the elevator to the 40th floor and walked into the lobby outside the main boardroom with the contained energy of a man who has been working toward a specific moment for a long time and has now arrived at its threshold. He said good morning to the assistant at the front desk. She said good morning back. She was slightly more formal than usual. He attributed it to the importance of the day. The boardroom was arranged differently than it normally was. The main table had additional chairs set along the sides, chairs that were typically used for overflow seating at large client presentations. There were faces Raymond did not recognize seated at those side chairs. There were attorneys, he realized, men and women with the specific quiet attentiveness of people who are present to document what happens rather than to participate in it. Miles Whitmore was in the room, but he was seated to the right of the head of the table rather than at it. Raymond noticed this without yet understanding it. The head of the table was empty. Raymond chose a seat 2 chairs from the head, the position he always took in executive meetings. He opened his notebook. He put his pen on the table. He waited. Arthur Hargrove enters. Arthur Hargrove entered the boardroom at 9 o'clock exactly. He was accompanied by 2 attorneys, a woman in her 40s and a man in his 50s, both carrying identical leather portfolios, and a third person, a woman in her late 30s, who was later identified as an organizational consultant specializing in leadership restructuring. Arthur wore a dark suit, no tie. He moved to the head of the table with the ease of a man who had walked into hundreds of rooms like this one and had never once needed to assert his presence because his presence asserted itself. He sat down. He placed a single folder on the table in front of him. He looked around the room. Then he looked at Raymond Cole. Miles Whitmore spoke first. He introduced Arthur Hargrove as the majority shareholder of Whitmore Capital Group, effective as of 14 months prior, whose investment had been facilitated through Hargrove Holdings, LLC, and its associated entities. He said it in the measured, careful tone of a man reciting something he had been coached to say precisely. Raymond heard every word. He absorbed none of them immediately. His brain was doing what human brains do when they receive information that contradicts everything they thought was true. It was searching, rapidly and desperately, for a way to reframe the information so that it fit the existing picture. It could not find one. There was no reframe available. Arthur Hargrove owned Raymond's company, had owned it for more than a year, had been sitting in board meetings, quietly, while Raymond prepared talking points for a promotion that was never going to arrive. Raymond's hands were flat on the table. He did not move them. Arthur Hargrove looked at him with an expression that was neither hostile nor warm. It was the expression of a man who has made a decision and is now simply present for its execution. He said, "Raymond, I believe we have some business to discuss." His voice was even. There was no satisfaction in it. There was no cruelty. There was only the specific, complete authority of a man who had arrived exactly where he intended to arrive, at exactly the moment he had chosen. Raymond said, "Yes, sir." It was the only thing he said for the next 22 minutes. 2 hours and 23 minutes. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 23 minutes. Arthur Hargrove did not fire Raymond Cole. He did not demote him. He did not raise his voice or reference his daughter or say anything that could be characterized as personal. He restructured the senior leadership team of Whitmore Capital Group with the efficiency and thoroughness of a man who had been planning the restructure for over a year. A new position was created, Chief Operating Officer, to be filled by an external hire whose name had already been selected. The COO would sit between the CEO and the vice presidents, reporting to Arthur's appointed CEO designate. Raymond's senior vice president role would remain, but it would now report to the incoming COO rather than directly to the CEO. His responsibilities would be adjusted accordingly. A full organizational chart was distributed to everyone in the room. Raymond's name was on it. It was just further down than it had been when he walked in. The promotion to executive vice president was not mentioned, not because it had been formally withdrawn. It simply did not exist anymore. The position had been created to fill the space that Raymond's ambition occupied in Miles Whitmore's mind. Arthur Hargrove had not created that position. Arthur Hargrove had no interest in creating it. Raymond's career at Whitmore Capital was not over. It had been quietly, methodically, and permanently capped. And in the language of corporate restructuring, in the measured tones of attorneys and organizational consultants, that fact was communicated without a single unkind word being spoken. The drive home Raymond drove home in silence. He did not turn on the radio. He did not call anyone. He sat in traffic on the interstate and watched the brake lights ahead of him blink on and off, and tried to hold the morning inside his chest without it pulling him apart. When he turned onto his street, he noticed that Cassandra's car was in the driveway. He sat in his own driveway for 4 minutes before going inside. Cassandra was in the kitchen. She looked at him when he walked in. She did not ask how the meeting went. She waited. Raymond sat down at the kitchen table. He was still wearing the new tie. He looked at the surface of the table for a moment. Then he said, "Diana's father owns my company." Cassandra set down what she was holding. She already knew. She had known since Tuesday morning 4 days ago. But she had not known how to tell him, and she had been waiting, with a dread she could not fully articulate, for this exact moment. She sat down across from him. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The phone call Raymond called Diana that evening. She picked up on the second ring. He said her name. She said his. He said, "Why didn't you ever tell me? About your father, about who he was." Diana was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone gathering an excuse, but the silence of someone deciding how honest to be. Then she said, "You never asked, Raymond." Her voice was not unkind. It was not triumphant. It was simply factual, in the way that the truest things tend to be. "You never asked about my family. Not once. Not in 16 years. Raymond had no answer for that. He thought about the cookout where he had met her. He thought about the dinners, the years, the conversations. He tried to remember a single instance in which he had asked Diana about her family, with genuine curiosity, and he could not produce one. The line stayed open for 4 more seconds. Then Diana ended the call. Raymond sat with the phone in his hand. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked once and then was still. The evening settled around Raymond Cole like something he had earned, what Arthur Hargrove actually wanted. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Raymond Cole received a certified letter from Hargrove Holdings' legal team. He opened it at his kitchen table on a Saturday morning while Cassandra was at the grocery store. It was not a termination notice. It was an offer. An 18-month structured transition plan in which Raymond would continue in his current role at full salary while the organizational restructuring was completed. At the end of the 18 months, he would receive a severance package, the specifics of which had been calculated by people who understood both financial precision and the particular mathematics of a man's dignity. The offer was, by any objective measure, generous. It was the most expensive version of a door being held open. Raymond's attorney read the letter twice, then a third time. He said, "He's not punishing you, he's retiring you with dignity." Raymond asked why. His attorney said he wasn't sure. Raymond drove to Arthur Hargrove's office 3 days later, without an appointment. The receptionist called upstairs. Arthur Hargrove had him sent up. He was in a corner office, seated at a desk that was mostly clear, a cup of coffee in front of him. He indicated the chair across from him. Raymond sat. He said, "I need to understand why you're doing this the way you're doing it." Arthur looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Because my daughter raised a good child with you, Raymond. Nadia loves her father. I have no interest in destroying the grandfather of my grandchild's father." He paused. "I just needed you to understand the weight of what you had." Raymond sat with that for a long time. He said, "Is this about Diana?" Arthur said, "This is about Nadia. Diana doesn't need anything from me on her behalf. She never has." Raymond asked, "Does Diana know you did this?" Arthur said, "She knew I bought a company. She doesn't direct my business decisions. She never asked me to do anything." Raymond said, "But you did it anyway." Arthur looked out the window for a moment. Then he said, "A man watches his daughter receive divorce papers on a Saturday morning and go to a school play that same evening without missing a curtain call. He decides on his own what that means." Raymond did not have a response for that. He thanked Arthur Hargrove for his time. He stood. He shook the man's hand. Arthur Hargrove shook it back firmly, without warmth and without coldness, the handshake of a man who has said what needed to be said and considers the matter handled. Cassandra, the marriage between Raymond Cole and Cassandra Vipqce, did not end in a dramatic confrontation. It ended the way marriages that are built on incomplete foundations tend to end, with distance, with the gradual recognition that what had seemed like clarity was actually projection, and with the specific, quiet devastation of realizing that you married not the man who existed, but the man you had decided he was. Cassandra had signed up to be the woman who came after Diana. She had not signed up to spend the rest of her life living inside the long shadow of what Diana's father had done to Raymond's career, the permanent restructuring of his professional trajectory, the way every gathering with the Cole family now carried the weight of a thing nobody talked about directly but everyone felt. By the time Nadia turned 17, Cassandra had retained her own attorney. The conversations between her and Raymond had not become cruel. They had become careful, which is often worse. They were two people navigating the paperwork of a decision they were making slowly and in parallel, both of them aware of where it was going, and neither of them willing to be the one who named it first. The Cole family, Aunt Loretta, the cousins, the extended network that had celebrated this marriage with such visible satisfaction, had gone notably quiet. Aunt Loretta, when reached by a mutual family friend, said only that she was praying for everyone involved. Pastor Joel Fenton, who had officiated the ceremony and who had known the Cole family for 20 years, said the same thing when asked. He looked like a man who had recently arrived at an uncomfortable understanding of his own role in a story he had assumed was a simple one. Diana Cole did not remarry. She completed her MBA with a concentration in corporate finance and accepted a position at a policy institute in Atlanta, the kind of work she had always wanted to do and had temporarily set aside during the years when Nadia needed more of her. She saw Nadia on the custody schedule, and she took her to Arthur's monthly family dinners, where the table was large and full, and Arthur presided over it with the same unhurried authority he brought to everything else in his life. Diana, when Nadia once asked her directly whether she had known what her grandfather was going to do, gave an answer that Nadia turned over in her mind for months afterward. She said, "I knew who he was. I knew what kind of man he was. I didn't ask him to do anything, and I didn't stop him from doing what he decided to do." Sometimes the people who love you will protect you in ways you never asked for and wouldn't have chosen for yourself, and the best thing you can do is live a life that makes that protection feel like it was worth their time. Nadia carried that answer with her. She was not fully sure she agreed with it. She thought about her father, about the way he looked now, quieter than he used to be, more careful, as if each word cost him something he was now aware of spending. She thought about the fact that she loved him regardless, that she called him every week, that he showed up to every single thing that mattered in her life without ever being asked twice. She thought about the fact that her grandfather and her father had shaken hands in the parking lot of her school's winter concert and spoken for 3 minutes about nothing in particular. the weather, a basketball game, and that neither of them had acknowledged the enormity of everything that had happened between that handshake and the last time they were in a room together. She thought this was probably what it looked like when grown men decide, without discussing it, to prioritize a child over their own grievance. She found it both admirable and faintly heartbreaking, the way most of the true things in life tend to be. Raymond Cole completed his 18-month advisory period at Whitmore Capital Group without incident. He was professional, he was thorough, he transitioned his client relationships with care and delivered every deliverable on the schedule his contract required. On his last day, he shook hands with the new COO, nodded to the colleagues who came by his office to say goodbye, and took the elevator down to the lobby for the last time on a Thursday afternoon. He stood outside the building for a moment in the fall air. Then he called Nadia. She answered on the first ring. He said he was done. She said, "How do you feel?" He thought about it. He said, "Like I'm starting something, which is a strange thing to feel at 48. She laughed. It was a good laugh. Her mother's stillness and his warmth, combined in the specific way that only she could combine them. He drove home in the late afternoon traffic. The radio played. He turned it up. He did not go back into financial services immediately. He took 6 months to think clearly for the first time in years about what he actually wanted. Not what the next logical step was, not what his family expected, not what his title on a business card would say, but what he wanted. He started consulting for small businesses owned by people who looked like him and had come from where he came from. He was good at it. He was patient with them in ways he had not always been patient with himself. He talked to a therapist for the first time in his life, which he had always told himself he didn't need. The therapist asked him, in their third session, what he thought he had been most afraid of throughout his marriage to Diana. He sat with the question for a long time. Then he said, that she already knew who she was, and I was still figuring it out. And I was afraid that if I looked at her too closely, she would see that. The therapist wrote something in her notebook. Raymond watched her write it. He did not ask what it said. He thought he probably already knew. Raymond Cole had everything a man is told to want: a career, a family, a title on a door, and a salary that made his relatives proud, and a neighborhood that confirmed, in its quiet way, that he had arrived. He had run every lap, he had made every sacrifice, and he lost the most important thread of it, not because he was cruel or dishonest or driven by malice, but because he was incurious. Because he was so focused on being known, on being seen, on being recognized, on climbing the next rung, that he never stopped to look at the woman beside him, never asked about her family, never asked about her father, never asked about the life she had come from or the world she carried inside her. He loved Diana, or he believed he loved her, and he assumed that love was enough to constitute attention. It is not. It never has been. Attention is its own practice, and it requires something that ambition tends to consume: stillness. Arthur Hargrove did not break any laws. He did not threaten anyone. He did not stage a dramatic confrontation or deliver a speech. He bought a company at fair market value, showed up to board meetings, and restructured a leadership team. Everything he did was legal, documented, and professionally legitimate. And yet the impact on Raymond Cole's life was total. Not because Arthur Hargrove destroyed him, but because Arthur Hargrove simply arranged the furniture so that Raymond could no longer avoid seeing exactly what he had chosen and exactly what that choice had cost. Some men learn that lesson at 25. Some learn it at 46. Raymond Cole learned it in a boardroom on a Tuesday morning across a table from a man whose daughter he had spent 16 years failing to see clearly. Diana Cole never asked for any of it. She did not orchestrate what her father did, and she did not benefit from it financially in any way she hadn't already earned. She simply lived the life she had always been living, quietly, precisely, with full knowledge of who she was and where she came from, while the people around her drew their own conclusions. She waited for 16 years for someone to ask the right question. The question never came, and the woman who never needed to be rescued went right on not needing to be rescued, while the man who left her learned, in the most expensive classroom available, what it costs to mistake someone's stillness for simplicity. Nadia Cole, at her high school graduation, invited both of her parents. They sat on opposite sides of the same row, with 3 empty seats between them. Arthur Hargrove sat in the center of those 3 empty seats. When Nadia crossed the stage to receive her diploma and looked out at the audience, she found all 3 of them without difficulty. Her grandfather was already on his feet. He was clapping louder than anyone around him. He was, for that moment, not a billionaire, or a majority shareholder, or a man with a plan. He was a grandfather watching his granddaughter cross a stage, and that, in the end, was always the only thing he was doing this for. So let me ask you this, and I want you to sit with it before you scroll past or close the tab. The man in this story, Raymond Cole, he was not a bad man. He worked hard. He loved his daughter. He tried to build something real. But he made a choice, several choices, that were informed by the voices of people who were loud about their love and quiet about their understanding. And he paid for those choices in a way that was calibrated, patient, and permanent. Here is the question I want you to leave with. How well do you actually know the people closest to you? Not their surface. Their surface is easy. How well do you know where they come from, who their people are, what they are capable of when they decide, quietly and without announcement, to show you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you think about your own life, your own choices, the questions you may or may not have been asking, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. We tell these stories because they are true in the ways that matter, and because the people in them, the Dianas, the Arthurs, the Nadias, deserve to have someone pay attention to the full picture. That is what we do here at Hidden Chapters. We pay attention, we tell the whole story. And we never let the loudest voice in the room be the only one you hear. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos.